Sarah stood in the kitchen at 6:47 a.m., staring at her phone. The email subject line read, USCIS decision, case ETH-2847. Her finger hovered over the notification, trembling. This was the fourth time in 18 months she'd received a message like this, and the previous three all contained the same word in the first sentence: denied. The coffee maker gurgled behind her, finishing its cycle with a final hiss and click. Through the window above the sink, she could see David loading landscape equipment into his truck, his breath visible in the early March cold. He didn't know yet. Didn't know that their answer had arrived while he was outside checking tire pressure and loading shovels. Sarah's thumb moved toward the display. She stopped. Her heart hammered against her ribs so hard, she could feel the pulse in her throat. The device felt cold and smooth in her palm, slippery with sweat. She set it face down on the counter and gripped the edge of the granite with both hands. Maybe she wouldn't open it. Maybe if she didn't read it, the answer could stay suspended in possibility instead of collapsing into another no. The tile floor sent cold through her bare feet, up into her ankles. Her coffee sat untouched, steam rising in a lazy spiral toward the ceiling. The truck door slammed outside. David would be coming in any second to grab his thermos and kiss her goodbye. She picked up the device again. Her finger touched the glass. 18 months earlier, Sarah and David Mitchell had stood in a cramped office in Addis Ababa, looking at a photo paper clipped to a file folder. The social worker, a woman named Almaz with kind eyes and graying hair, slid the folder across the desk. Inside was a picture of a 4-year-old girl with enormous brown eyes and 2 neat braids tied with yellow ribbons. Her name is Meklit, Almaz said quietly. It means beautiful in Amharic. She has been here at the orphanage for 2 years. Her story is in the file, but I will tell you the important part. She is bright. She is healthy. And she is waiting for a family. Sarah had picked up the photo, and her fingers shook against the paper edges. David leaned over her shoulder, and she felt him go still. The girl in the picture wasn't smiling, but there was something in her expression. Alert, present, looking directly at the camera as if she could see through it to whoever might be looking back. We'd like to meet her, David said. His voice sounded rough, caught somewhere in his throat. Can we meet her today? Almaz smiled. She is in the playroom. I will take you now. They spent 10 days in Ethiopia that March. Meklit was shy the first morning, standing half hidden behind Almaz's skirt, peeking at these strange white visitors who spoke clumsy Amharic phrases they'd learned from a phone app. But by afternoon, she was holding Sarah's hand. By the second day, she climbed into David's lap during story time. By day 3, she called them Mama and Baba. Each day felt both endless and impossibly short, time moving in strange rhythms that made no sense. The morning they left to return to Ohio, Meklit stood at the gate holding Almaz's hand. She wore the yellow dress Sarah had bought her at the market, the one that matched her favorite hair ribbons. The other children crowded around, waving and calling goodbye, but Meklit just stared at them with those enormous eyes. When are you coming back? She asked in Amharic. Almaz translated, though Sarah had understood the words. Very soon, Sarah said, crouching down to Meklit's eye level. We have to go home and finish the paperwork, and then we'll come back, and you'll come home with us. To America. To your new house with your new room. Remember the pictures we showed you? Meklit nodded, but her bottom lip trembled. Very soon, she repeated carefully in English, practicing the words Sarah had taught her. Very soon, Sarah said again. She pulled Meklit into a hug, breathing in the coconut oil smell of her hair, memorizing the weight of her small body against her chest. I promise. That promise had been made in late March 2019. By June, when the first rejection letter arrived, very soon had already started to feel like a lie. Sarah stood at the counter, holding an envelope with a U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services return address. David stood beside her, still in his work clothes, dirt on his boots and mulch dust on his jeans. Neither of them spoke. The paper felt thick between her fingers, official and final. She tore the envelope open. The letter was 2 pages, dense with bureaucratic language, but the relevant section jumped out immediately. Your petition for adoption has been denied due to insufficient documentation of orphan status. You may resubmit with additional evidence or file an appeal. Insufficient documentation, David said. He took the letter, scanned it, read it again. What does that even mean? The agency said everything was complete. Alma said the Ethiopian courts had already ruled Meklit was legally available for adoption. Sarah walked to the table and sat down. Her legs wouldn't hold her anymore. The chair creaked under her weight. We'll call the agency, she said. Her words sounded strange, distant, like someone else was speaking. We'll figure out what they need. We'll get it and resubmit. David pulled out his phone, already scrolling for the agency's number. Yeah, he said. We'll fix this. It's just a paperwork thing. We'll fix it. But his jaw was clenched tight, and his thumb moved too fast across the display. Sarah watched him and felt something cold and heavy settle behind her ribs. The first whisper of a question she wasn't ready to ask yet. What if we can't fix it? The adoption agency was apologetic but confused. Their contact, a woman named Jennifer who'd walked them through the home study and the dossier preparation, reviewed their file over the phone and insisted everything had been submitted correctly. Ethiopian Social Services had provided all necessary documentation. The court in Addis Ababa had terminated parental rights and declared Meklit adoptable. The medical exam was complete and current. I don't understand what they're asking for, Jennifer said. Her frustration was audible through the line, sharp and clipped. I'm going to reach out to the USCIS officer assigned to your case and get clarification. She called back 3 days later. She couldn't get clarification. The officer wouldn't take her calls, and the response was a form letter restating the rejection reason, without additional detail. So what do we do? Sarah asked. She was sitting in her second-grade classroom after school. Papers to grade spread across her desk, but she hadn't touched them. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, making bright rectangles on the floor that slowly moved across the tile. We gather everything we can, Jennifer said. Birth records, death certificates for biological parents, affidavits from Ethiopian officials, medical records, everything that proves Meklit's status. Then we resubmit and hope the next review is more thorough. Sarah hung up and stared at her classroom walls. 22 student photos smiled at her from the bulletin board, their gap-toothed grins and crooked signatures on self-portraits. She'd taught second grade for 8 years. She was good at it. Patient and creative, good at reaching the kids who struggled with reading, or who came to school carrying problems too big for 7-year-olds to carry. She'd been so sure she was meant to be Meklit's mother. That night, she and David video-called the facility in Addis Ababa. The connection was bad, pixelated and laggy, the audio cutting in and out. But Meklit's face appeared on the laptop display. She smiled when she saw them, that shy smile that Sarah had memorized during their 10 days together. Hi, sweet girl, Sarah said, working hard to keep her tone steady. We miss you so much. Meklit held up a drawing. It showed 3 stick figures holding hands under a yellow sun. I drew my family, she said in Amharic. Alma's translated from off-camera. That's Mama, and that's Baba, and that's me. David's palm found Sarah's under the table and gripped hard. His fingers were rough, calloused from work. That's beautiful, honey, he said. The words cracked on the last syllable. "We're working really hard on the paperwork so we can come get you, okay? It's taking a little longer than we thought, but we're not giving up." "When are you coming?" Meklit asked. The same question she'd asked at the gate. The question Sarah still couldn't answer. The second rejection arrived in September, 3 months after they'd resubmitted, with a binder full of additional documentation. This time the letter cited concerns about authenticity of birth records. Sarah read it twice, then set it down carefully on the table as if it might detonate. David didn't wait. He booked a flight that night, landed in Addis Ababa 40 hours later, and spent 4 days navigating government offices to obtain certified copies of every document related to Meklit's case. Birth certificates stamped and sealed by 3 different officials. Death certificates for both biological parents, complete with government seals. Affidavits from the facility, the regional court, and the Ethiopian Adoption Authority. The trip cost $4,000 they didn't have. David put it on a credit card and didn't tell Sarah until after he landed back in Ohio. She found out when she opened the mail and saw the statement, the number at the bottom making her chest tighten. They sat on their back porch that evening, the September air just starting to cool, cicadas loud in the trees. David's face was drawn, exhausted from jet lag and frustration, dark circles under his eyes like bruises. "I had to go," he said. "We needed those documents." "I know," Sarah said. She wasn't angry, just tired. So tired the exhaustion felt like something physical, a weight pressing down on her shoulders and spine. "We'll make it work." But making it work meant David taking every job that came his way, his back aching and his knees protesting. Sarah picked up summer school teaching for extra money. Their church small group brought meals twice a week, casseroles in disposable aluminum pans that Sarah could just throw away after. The meals kept coming even when they said they didn't need help. They resubmitted in October with the new certified documents. By December, they'd heard nothing. Sarah found herself checking messages obsessively, every notification making her heart jump and her stomach clench. She stopped sleeping well, waking at 3 a.m. to scroll through her inbox, looking for updates that never came. Christmas Eve service at church should have been beautiful. The sanctuary was decorated with white lights and evergreen garland, the air smelling of pine and candle wax. The children's choir sang Silent Night, with earnest, slightly off-key voices that made people smile. Sarah sat in the pew next to David, palms folded in her lap, and felt nothing. Just a hollow emptiness where joy used to live. The rejection arrived during the closing prayer. Her phone buzzed in her purse. She ignored it until after the benediction, but she knew. Somehow she knew before she even looked. Third time. This one cited incomplete medical examination. The form they'd submitted was an older version. USCIS had updated their requirements and wanted a new form. Sarah stood up, walked down the church aisle while people were still gathering coats and greeting each other, and went outside. The December air was cold enough to make her lungs burn. She stood in the parking lot under the security lights, their yellow glow making everything look sickly and strange, and let the tears come. She didn't hear Pastor Ken approach. He'd been their pastor for 6 years, a tall man with graying temples, and a quiet way of listening that made people tell him things they didn't tell anyone else. He didn't say anything at first, just stood beside her in the cold, breath making small clouds in the air between them. Third time, Sarah said finally. The words came out rough, scraped raw. They want a different version of a medical form. 18 months we've been fighting this. 18 months she's been there. Pastor Ken nodded slowly. His coat collar was turned up against the wind. "I have a friend from college," she said. "Immigration lawyer. One of the best. Let me call him. See if he can look at your case." Sarah turned to look at him. "Lawyers cost money we don't have." "Let me call him first," Pastor Ken said, "before you worry about cost." Sometimes it helps just to have someone who knows the system take a look. The lawyer's name was Michael Chen. He called Sarah and David 3 days after Christmas, told them he'd reviewed their case file the Pastor Ken had sent over, and said 6 words that changed everything. "I'll take this pro bono." Michael had been adopted himself from Taiwan when he was 2 years old. He specialized in immigration law with a focus on international adoption cases. "What's happening to you is unfortunately not uncommon," he explained over the phone. "Some USCIS officers are extremely thorough to the point of being obstructive. Your case has had the same officer for all 3 rejections, which is a red flag. I'm going to file a formal complaint and request a case reassignment." "How long will that take?" David asked. They had him on speakerphone, both of them sitting at the table with the device between them, staring at it like it might disappear. 3 to 6 months just to get a response," Michael said. "I won't lie to you, the system is slow, but this is the right move. Your paperwork is solid. You've done everything correctly. You just need a fair review." 3 to 6 months felt like a lifetime. It was January 2020. They'd met Meklit almost a year ago. She would turn 5 in April. Sarah had never even been to her birthday party. They filed the medical form update the same week. Michael filed his complaint and reassignment request. Then they sat back and let time crawl forward. January became February. February became March. And then the world changed. COVID hit like a freight train. Schools closed. David's landscaping jobs evaporated as people canceled services, afraid of having workers around. The courts shut down. Immigration processing ground to a halt. And in an office somewhere, a bureaucrat looked at their case file and typed out a 4th rejection. Health examination expired due to processing delays. The letter arrived in late March, almost exactly 1 year after they'd left Meklit at the gate with her yellow dress and her whispered "very soon." Sarah read it sitting on the front porch steps, the spring sun warm on her shoulders, birds singing in the maple tree, the world bright and alive and completely indifferent to her grief. David found her there an hour later. He'd been out checking on the equipment in his shop, taking inventory of supplies for jobs that weren't coming. He sat down beside her on the steps, the concrete rough and still cool from the night before. She handed him the letter without speaking. He read it, set it down, put his head in his palms. "Michael filed an emergency motion," Sarah said. Her tone sounded mechanical, like she was reading from a script someone else had written. "He's arguing the delays weren't our fault. The delays were because of COVID and their own slow processing. He says there's legal precedent for this kind of appeal." "How long?" David asked. The words were muffled by his palms. 8 months for the backlog. Maybe longer. That's just to get a hearing date. David's shoulders started shaking. Sarah put her arm around him and felt her own tears start again, the kind of crying that comes from somewhere deeper than sadness. The kind that comes from places that don't have words attached. The church started a Wednesday night prayer vigil. Pastor Ken organized it, spreading the word through messages and the church social media group. Every Wednesday at 7 p.m., people gathered in the church basement to pray specifically for the Mitchells and for Meklit. Sarah and David went the first week, sat in the circle of folding chairs under the flickering fluorescent lights, listened to people pray for breakthrough and divine intervention, and God's perfect timing. The prayers sounded distant, like they were happening underwater. Sarah strained to hear them reach heaven. She heard nothing. By June, they were barely holding on. David's business had lost 60% of its revenue. They were behind on the mortgage. The credit card bills from the trip and the resubmission costs were piling up. White envelopes with red past due stamps. Sarah was teaching online, struggling to engage second graders through a computer monitor, feeling like she was failing at everything. And Meklit was still there, They video called every week, and every week she asked the same question. "When are you coming?" Sarah had stopped saying very soon. She'd started saying, "I don't know, honey. We're trying. We haven't given up." One night in late June, Sarah sat at the table after another video call. Meklit had looked smaller somehow, her face thinner, and the yellow ribbons in her hair had been faded and frayed. The bright color dulled to pale cream. Sarah stared at her laptop even after the call ended, at the frozen image of Meklit waving goodbye, her small hand blurred by motion. "I can't do this anymore," she said. David looked up from the bills he'd been sorting at the other end of the table. "Can't do what?" "This." She gestured at the laptop, at the stack of rejection letters in the drawer, at the whole impossible situation. "I can't keep believing it's going to work out. I can't keep hoping and having it destroyed every few months. I'm not giving up on her. I'm giving up on believing we'll actually get to bring her home." David set down the bill he'd been holding. His face appeared older than it had 2 years ago. Lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before, gray threaded through his beard. "I've been feeling the same way," he admitted, "like we're just lying to ourselves, like everyone watching us must think we're fools for still trying." They sat in silence. The clock ticked on the wall. Somewhere in the neighborhood, a dog barked. Sarah felt something inside her chest crack open, and it wasn't hope. It was the absence of hope, an empty room where furniture used to be. Pastor Ken came to their house the next evening. He didn't call first, just knocked on the door at 7 p.m. and stood on their porch holding a casserole dish. "Made too much dinner," he said. "Thought you might want some." It was obviously a lie. The casserole was still warm, steam rising from under the foil cover, the smell of chicken and rice drifting between them. But Sarah let him in, because turning away kindness felt like more effort than she had. They sat in the living room, the casserole forgotten on the coffee table, and Pastor Ken listened while Sarah and David talked. About the rejections. About the money. About Meklit getting older in that place while they failed to bring her home. About feeling like maybe God had said no and they'd just been too stubborn to hear it. When they finished, Pastor Ken was quiet for a long moment. Then he leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and looked at them both. "Sometimes faith isn't believing God will say yes," he said. "Sometimes faith is choosing to keep standing when every answer is no. When nothing makes sense except quitting, and you stand anyway. That's not foolishness, that's faith." Sarah's vision blurred. "I don't know if I have that kind of faith anymore." "Then let me carry it for you," Pastor Ken said. "Let the church carry it. That's what we're here for." The following Sunday, Pastor Ken announced a 3-day church-wide fast and prayer for the Mitchell family, not asking for participation, just offering it. 30 people signed up. They prayed in shifts, 24 hours straight for 3 days, covering the Mitchells and Meklit, and the whole impossible tangle of immigration law and pandemic delays. Sarah didn't participate in the fast. She wasn't sure she could. But on the 3rd day, she drove to the church at 2 a.m., let herself in with the key Pastor Ken had given her years ago when she taught VBS, and walked down to the basement. 3 people were there, sitting in the circle of folding chairs, praying quietly. They looked up when she came in, smiled, made space in the circle. Sarah sat down and closed her eyes. She didn't know what to pray. The words wouldn't come. So she just sat there, listening to the others pray, letting their faith be enough for one more night. July 15th dawned hot and humid, the kind of summer day where the air felt thick before the sun even finished rising. Sarah stood in her kitchen at 6:47 a.m., making coffee by muscle memory, when her phone buzzed. A message from Michael Chen. Subject line: Update on your case. Please call ASAP. She dialed his number with shaking fingers. He answered on the second ring. Good news, he said without preamble. Your case has been reassigned. The new officer called me directly yesterday. She reviewed the entire file, saw the pattern of rejections, and she's expediting a new review. What does that mean? Sarah asked. The words came out as a whisper. It means she's looking at it with fresh eyes. It means she acknowledged the previous denials were questionable. She specifically told me, and this is a direct quote, I'm going to fix this. Sarah's knees went weak. She sat down hard in a chair, the wood creaking beneath her. How long until we know? She's putting a rush on it. 2 to 3 weeks, maybe less. Sarah called David. He was already on a job site, trimming hedges for one of his few remaining clients, but he dropped the trimmer and got back in his truck. When he walked through the door 10 minutes later, dirt on his palms and hedge clippings in his hair, she was still sitting at the table, staring at nothing. New officer, she said. She's expediting the review. Michael thinks this is it. David pulled her up from the chair and wrapped his arms around her. Neither of them said anything else. There weren't words big enough. 3 weeks felt longer than the previous 18 months combined. Sarah checked messages every hour. She couldn't sleep, lying awake in the dark, counting breaths. She snapped at her students during online classes, apologized, snapped again. David worked like a man possessed, taking every job he could get, needing to move, needing to do something with his body while they held their breath. The message arrived on August 15th at 6:47 a.m. Sarah was standing in the kitchen, the coffee maker gurgling behind her, David outside loading his truck. Her thumb hovered over the notification. USCIS decision, case hash ETH-2847. She touched the glass, the words opened. Her eyes found the first sentence. Your petition has been approved. The device slipped from her fingers and clattered onto the counter. She grabbed the edge of the granite to stay upright. Her vision blurred. She blinked hard, looked at the display again. Approved. The word was still there, black text on white background, real and solid. David, she screamed. David, get in here! He came running, boots tracking mud across the floor, tool belt still strapped to his waist. He thought something was wrong. His face was white, eyes wide. What happened? We got her, Sarah said. The words broke in the middle. We got her. We're approved. He grabbed the device from the counter, read the message, read it again. Then he looked at Sarah, and his face crumpled. They collapsed onto the floor together, crying and laughing, holding each other while the coffee maker beeped that it was finished, and the morning sun came through the window and painted everything gold. The logistics happened fast. Michael worked magic with expedited travel permissions during COVID restrictions. 2 weeks later, Sarah and David boarded a plane, masks on their faces, the cabin half empty, everything surreal and dreamlike. 30 hours of travel that felt both endless and impossibly short. They landed in Addis Ababa on a Tuesday morning. The facility was expecting them. Almaz met them at the gate. Older than Sarah remembered. More gray in her hair, but her smile was the same. She is ready, Almaz said. She has been ready for so long. Meklit stood in the courtyard, surrounded by other children who crowded close to watch. She wore her yellow dress, the one Sarah had bought 20 months ago, and it was too small now. The hem hid above her knees. Her legs were longer, her face less round. She was 5.5 years old, and Sarah and David had missed 18 months of her life. For a moment, no one moved. Meklit stared at them, her enormous brown eyes uncertain, like she was afraid they might disappear again. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. What if she didn't remember? What if too much time had passed? Then Meklit smiled. "Mama," she said. "Baba, you came back." She ran across the courtyard, dust swirling around her feet, yellow ribbons streaming from her braids. Sarah dropped to her knees and caught her daughter, felt the solid weight of her body, breathed in the coconut oil smell of her hair. David wrapped his arms around both of them, and they stayed like that while the other children cheered, and Almaz quietly wiped her eyes with the edge of her sleeve. "You came back," Meklit said again, her face pressed against Sarah's shoulder. Her English had improved. She'd been practicing. "I knew you would come back." "I promised," Sarah said. The words were thick with tears. "I promised you very soon. I'm sorry it took so long." 3 days later, they boarded a plane as a family of 3. Meklit sat between them, holding both their palms during takeoff, her eyes wide as the ground fell away beneath them. Sarah showed her Ohio on the in-flight map, traced the route across the ocean with her finger. "That's where we're going," she said. "That's home." Meklit touched the display, her small finger covering the outline of Ohio. "Home," she repeated carefully. "Our home." Now, 18 months later, Meklit is 7 years old. She speaks English fluently, still sprinkles in Amharic words when she's excited or tired. She loves books and drawing, and helping David with the yard work, pulling weeds alongside him in the flower beds. Her bedroom has a map on the wall, with 2 pins connected by red string. Ethiopia, Ohio. Home and home. Sarah teaches 2nd grade again, in person now, and Meklit sometimes visits her classroom after school. The kids crowd around her, asking questions about where she was born, and Meklit answers patiently, teaching them words in Amharic, showing them photos of the facility in Almaz and the country where she came from. Michael Chen now handles adoption cases for families in their church network, often pro bono. He says every case reminds him of his own story, of the people who fought for him when he was too small to fight for himself. David and his crew have repainted the church basement twice, free of charge, grateful for the space that held them during the long months of uncertainty. The Wednesday night prayer group still meets. Different needs now. Different families going through impossible situations. Sarah and David go when they can, sit in the circle of folding chairs, and pray for other people's very soon moments. They know what it costs to keep standing when every answer is no. Every summer, they return. They bring suitcases full of school supplies and medical supplies and toys donated by their church. Meklit runs through the gate like she never left, hugging Almaz and the caretakers and the children who are still there. She shows them photos of Ohio. "This is my house," she tells them in Amharic. "This is my school. This is my family. And you'll have one too. Just keep going. They'll come." Some families aren't built by biology or easy paperwork, but by the kind of love that refuses to let go even when every door slams shut. Sometimes faith looks like showing up to fight another day when logic says to quit. Like a community that prays when you can't, that carries your hope when yours runs out. The Mitchells learned that waiting isn't wasted when it builds something stronger than instant answers ever could.